Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again and welcome to episode 46 of this podcast series. I'm Martin Ballard, and can you believe we're already 2 months into the countdown for the 2023-24 Panto season.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
Now, if you missed any of the previous episodes, you can still listen to them. We've had some fabulous guests so far, from directors and choreographers to lighting designers and many of the stars of Imagine Theatre shows. We've talked about how pantomime is produced, its history and its future. And there are many more episodes to come from Imagine, one of the UK's biggest producers of pantomime and children's theatre. In the last episode, we reviewed the last Panto season and looked ahead to what 2023 has in store with Imagine Managing Director Steve Bowden and his wife, Business and Marketing Director Sarah Bowden. This time, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Mr. Pantomime himself. After 48 years in the industry as Dame or Ugly Sister alongside the late Peter Robbins, often appearing in 2 pantomimes in one season. Panto is his life for 12 months of the year, with his Pantomime Roadshow and of course his website, itsbehindyou.com, which is the ultimate guide to British pantomime. And if this isn't enough, he writes scripts, designs costumes and shows for venues across the country, as well as designing and making all of his own. He is, of course, the legend, Nigel Ellacott. How are you, Nigel?
Hello, I'm exhausted after that introduction. I need to lie down.
First of all, how was the past pantomime season for you? You were in Richmond, of course.
I was in Richmond. Do you know, I was so popular in Richmond in 1986, they couldn't wait to ask me back. So, and it was fascinating to go back, honestly, because you walk in there and my brain keeps going, well, where's the staircase gone? And, oh, right, so, and literally I would be backstage and I'd be looking at this fire exit door that led down to the pit thinking, I remember in 1986 that was the stage door, and you went up a winding staircase, a bit like in a castle, stone stairs and all that. And it was absolutely fascinating to be back there, and I just adored the place because I got myself a little hotel which was 3 minutes walk from the stage door, to wake up and to wander down and go by the side of the river and go and have a coffee and, oh, I think I'll have a croissant, oh, let me take a mortgage out, yes, there we are, I can afford a croissant. It was just a beautiful environment, a gorgeous theatre, a Matcham theatre, absolutely. You had to be careful on stage because literally if you let your mind wander and you suddenly look at the ceiling and you look at all the beautiful Frank Matcham architecture, you could literally forget your lines. I had a fabulous time.
It is a beautiful theatre, you're absolutely right. And we've talked on this podcast about the future of pantomime and, you know, whether or not we might see some new titles coming up or return to some old titles. And of course, your panto with the great Matt Baker and Jessica Martin was Goldilocks.
It was my first Goldilocks. I have never done a Goldilocks. I can remember that back in the day, the wonderful Paul Elliott, basically Goldilocks was his key to pantomime, because the first time he ever put pantomimes on, I think it was probably Hull, I think was his first one, late 60s, about 68, 69. He went to Howard and Wyndham and said, what have you got left? And they said, well, we've got a Goldilocks. And he said, right, I'll have it. And took the scenery, and he put Goldilocks on. Then later on, I sort of remember it having a resurgence, and it came back with, you'll recall, Frank Bruno. And now it's back again, it's revived, and it fascinated me so much that on my website I thought what I'll do is, I don't know anything about Goldilocks, so I'll look at the history of it and where it started. I bet you it's Victorian. It's not. It is a 1920s creation, and we have to thank David Croft, the author of things, you know, like Are You Being Served, Dad's Army and all the rest of it. He was the man who basically got hold of this ramshackle bit of fairy tale and said, right, we're going to set it in a circus, this is how it's going to go, and more or less we stick to that format.
Let's go back to the very beginning, shall we? As a child, Nigel, did you go and see pantomime?
Oh gosh, yes, I was so lucky. You see, my brother was the house manager at the Grand Theatre Swansea. So after school, generally, I would go to the theatre, and if I was well behaved, and which I made sure I was, I hung about there for a couple of hours before going back home. And I can so vividly remember going upstairs, and in the theatre bar at the Grand Theatre in Swansea on the first floor, there were all these old people wearing overcoats and hats, and they were all sort of standing around in the bar, and that was a rehearsal. So all the comics, the dames and all the rest of it, they would all be up there in the bar. They hadn't moved the bar furniture. Nobody blocked anything. And they would literally be old gentlemen there, freezing cold, no central heating, with their coats on, saying, well, I'm going to do the busy bee. Do you know that? Oh, yes. Do you know the end of the I'm not here gag? Oh, yeah. Well, OK, you do that one, I'll do that one. Nobody did their material, obviously. They talked. And then on the stage were the 12 or 14 or even probably 16 Cherry Willoughby dancers who had the stage. There was no need for the actors and the comics to block anything, because in those days there were no radio mics. There were 3 stand mics, centre and 2 on the sides. So you came on and you either went to the middle or you went to the side. That was it. So that's my very earliest memory, is elderly people with overcoats on who left the theatre with a carrier bag that probably clinked a little bit. Might have had a little bit of, Vimto in it. And I'd become that old man.
And of course, you've talked about some of the old routines there, the sort of music hall routines that came into Panto. Some of them we've lost along the way, some are still here. But obviously pantomime has changed an awful lot since you first saw those pantomimes in Swansea.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I actually think Dawson Chance and I, the fabulous ventriloquist, I think, along with Brian Connolly, I think we said goodbye to the 50p gag. I can remember the 50p gag was probably in every other pantomime for you, and then I can't remember where we were doing it. It was probably Southampton or somewhere, but I remember it was the death knell. You just went, do you know what? That's gone, that one. And now we're all square. Ta-da! Exit to sound of own feet. Yeah, some of those gags have gone for the best, I think. A little bit of Heaven Fell. Does anybody out there know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah? Sandbag?
But there are so many of those, aren't there? So many of those routines.
Oh, Tree of Truth.
I was going to mention the Tree of Truth, yes.
Tree of Truth, which a poor ASM at every single show had to take all these rubber balls and stick them back on a tree again. It took the whole of the between shows to put them up. I'll tell you what was revived. Michael Harrison has revived an old routine that I remember seeing originally with Jack Tripp, where you tell a lie and your clothes are whipped off. That was at the Palladium this year, and in several of his pantos. It's a lovely gag. Gags that everybody's doing at the moment. They're all doing If I Were Not in Pantomime, and also, of course, 12 Days of Christmas. It started off life as Automation, it was called, but I remember seeing it in its current format at the City Variety Leeds, very early 70s. These routines are passed on word of mouth, basically, by one generation to another, but now we don't have variety. Routines and Shaners, as we call them, are not being done. Summer season's not what it was. There's really no new gags appearing and nobody to pass them on.
So, Nigel, when did you first think you were going to become a performer, and how did that happen?
Actually performing, I suppose, I started doing stuff as a kid. I was about 12, 13, I suppose. I started doing stuff at HTV and BBC Wales in Cardiff, because I was born in Swansea, and we had studios in Cardiff, and I started doing stuff there. I started doing the clubs to get my equity card when I was about 16. So in those days, to get an equity card, you had to have 32 weeks work on your card to get a full card. And if you did the clubs, I may be wrong about this, but I vaguely remember, if you did a weekend in a club, it counted as half a week. So I had a top agent called Universal Entertainments of Neath, which I think is just a fabulous name. And I went around the clubs doing various sort of acts with the piano and stuff like that. So I was doing that before I went to teacher training college. So I would already had an equity card by the time I started to train as a drama teacher.
And what about your first ever professional pantomime? We'll talk about 1981 because that was a major year.
That was with Peter. My first ever professional one. Oh gosh, it would be. I did a tour of a kids show which went into the Sherman Theatre, Cardiff. Gawain and the Green Knight, and that was a sort of slightly panto version. Then I did the following year another tour that ended up at the Sherman, which was called Madam Wen, and that was a lady pirate, and that was a sort of panto version. From then on, it was animals. My chances of standing on 2 feet were gone. I was a goose for 3 years, bent double with as you do, bent double with flippers, a crash helmet with a 3-foot goose's head, 3 strings, eyes, mouth. My elbows were strapped to the wings. There was something indescribable behind me to work the tail rudder, and a duck decoy call stuffed in my mouth. And I can distinctly remember being at the Belgrade Theatre, Coventry, and the director saying, "I've had an idea. What about a chase with the goose around the auditorium?" And you know, when you're young, you just go, "Oh, yes, Mr. Director, of course." So I did 3 years of geese. Then I got to stand up because I was Puss in Boots for 2 years, because Puss in Boots starts off on 4 legs, ends up on 2. And then, hello, along came 1981.
It was the Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford.
Yes.
It was the first time you worked with Peter Robbins.
Yes.
How did the two of you come together?
Marvellous agent called Barry Stacey, and Barry, bless his heart, used to put shows on for kids, and I'd seen Peter in a tour of Hansel and Gretel, and I'd written the script for Cinderella at Ilford, and I said to Barry, "I'm looking for someone to play sister with me," and he said, "Let me put my thinking cap on." Next thing I know, I get a lager commercial. I think it was Skull Lager, and Barry got me the commercial and said, "Oh, well, I've put Peter with you, so you'll be able to have a chat and see if you get on." And that commercial was endless. I think we got there about 6:30, 7 in the morning. We ran heavily into overtime. Neither of us drank. So they were going around about every half hour. They go around with a turkey baster, stick it in the beer, squirt it to give it a frothy head, and leave us to it. And it was during that commercial that we basically outlined the rest of 28 years.
Were you aware, right at the very early stages, maybe in that panto itself, that the two of you had something special, the rapport and the chemistry between you?
100%. Absolutely. We had the same ideas. He'd done one dame and a couple of sisters, and he was mortified that his only review of his dame at Camberley said the dame was as tall as the beanstalk. He said it was accurate, but he was mortified. We'd sit in that dressing room, and you can't explain it. It's a magic thing that happens, but we thought alike. We had the same ideas. We literally bounced off each other, rapport, and then, to make life even better, we set off doing shows together, kids' plays together, as a double act. So we were doing Hansel and Gretel, we were doing Pinocchio, we were doing, Wizard of Oz, things like that. So during the year, we were honing what it is that we did at Christmas time, and I called it a stage marriage. It was like being married. That magic continued for 28 years, and it was magic.
What was the impact on you as an actor then in 2009? Emotionally, of course, you were very close anyway, and it was such a tragic... I mean, he was taken far too young, as we all know.
Yeah.
But when we lost Peter, what sort of thought process did you have about how you should go on with your own career?
It was really devastating. We had a contract for Wolverhampton Grand, and I can remember being on the phone to Peter and saying, "We've been asked to do Wolverhampton. It's awfully long." And he's going, "It is a bit long, isn't it?" And it's funny now, you don't complain today about, "Oh, the run is very long," but we recognised how exhausting doing that show was, all the changes of costume, etc. So we said, yeah, we're going to do it because it's a beautiful theatre. And within about 10 days after that phone conversation, Peter had died. And I can remember being taken for lunch by Michael Harrison, And he said, look, there's no pressure, whatever you want, but have you got any thoughts about what you'd like to do? Would you like to do Sister with somebody else? And I said, no, I wouldn't. Because you couldn't recapture it again. I would always be going, Peter didn't do it that way. Can you imagine being the person on stage where you go, oh, could you move over there because he always stood... No, you can't do that. So I said to Michael, what I'd like to do is I'd like to do Dame. And he said, oh, right, we'll put you... I said, no, I want to make my own Dame and I want you to come and see it. And then if you don't like it, it's up to you. But because I didn't know if the change from being funny and evil could change to being somebody's mother. So I literally wrote it, costumed it, put myself into the Kenneth More Theatre panto, Snow White, and asked, the great and good to come and have a little look at it. And I tell you what, the most amazing thing was the support. I had no idea the support of people that came to see me and would come backstage and go, we're so sorry to hear about Peter. This is what you need to do. All these people, all the Barbara Windsors, my mate Anna Karen, the Vicky Michelles, all these lovely people who came along. Michael Harrison came along. Paul Elliott came along. It was very, very heartwarming.
We talked about the writing. In fact, you were writing even before 1981. I think it's 30 or more scripts that you've written now, some of them even produced in the United States. But when did the costume design and costume making and all that sort of stuff start?
Do you know, to be honest, probably when I was about 18, 19 at Swansea, because my brother was managing at the Grand. We had the Swansea Youth Theatre, which I was heavily involved in. I found a diary the other day from something like, the very late 60s, early 70s. And I thought, how did I manage to do all that? To be a member of 3 amateur dramatic societies and rehearsing there. But what happened was, with the Swansea Youth Theatre, you'd say, we need costumes. So we would go and raid the Grand Theatre's wardrobe store, which wasn't huge, because mostly when they did rep they hired in the costumes every week. There wasn't time with weekly rep to actually make costumes, but we would go upstairs, Eleanor Thomas and I would go up there and raid the costumes and see if we could adapt things. And when Viv, my brother, came to Ilford to the Kenneth More to run it, that sort of happened then, because it was a case of, we need some costumes. We got 2 sets of costumes from Cyril Fletcher, which we bought, a Sleeping Beauty and a Mother Goose. And we used those costumes over and over again, just adapting them, changing them, before we started making them. And at that point, nobody else... honestly, the answer to your question is nobody else wanted to do it. That's the honest truth. And so I said, let's have a go. And that's how it started. And when Peter and I sat in that dressing room in 1982, and I said, do you want to do this again next year? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, let's put some money in an envelope every week, and we'll seal that envelope. And then during the year, we'll go and buy some fabric, get ourselves somebody to make. And thank God we found the lady who joined the Kenneth More Theatre, Margaret Bryce, had come from Berman and Nathan's. Margaret created our costumes for, the whole thing, really, 28 years. And to my great pride was to be able to ring Margaret up and say, the costumes are at the V&A, they're in a case, we can go and see them. And she said, I've already done that, and also my costumes that I made for Julie Andrews are in the museum as well. I mean, what are the chances of Peter and I getting together, meeting up with Margaret, and then having these fabulous costumes made? I'm not there anymore, by the way. I got booted out for Shirley Bassey.
Oh, well, never
I don't know who she is. Has she done pantomime? I don't know.
I think she's from Wales, though, so you're okay.
Is she? Okay, well, she's in the case now.
You've received numerous awards, but the UK Pantomime Association Outstanding Achievement Award, and it's easy to see why, because you've done so much for the profession, for the genre, and you've worked with so many amazing people. I remember seeing you, I think it was 96, 97 maybe, at the Theatre Royal Nottingham with Bradley Walsh in Cinderella.
Ah, yes, I was a child star, yes. I think I was about 11.
You've worked with everybody, and you've performed everywhere. But what are you most proud of?
Well, one thing's never being off. In 48 years, I mean, I can say that now because I haven't started another panto, but I've never, ever missed a show, and I've never, ever missed a year. I thought I would in the COVID times, but I got a lovely phone call from the Kenneth Moore, which is 3 minutes away from where I'm sitting now, who said, would you like to do a panto? This was during the COVID thing. And not only did we do a panto, but they streamed it, something I've never done before. So I've been so fortunate as to never have... That's what I'm most proud of, I think, is having never missed a single show.
The website is a fount of all panto knowledge. Whose idea was that?
I think it was Peter's, because I wasn't very technical at all, and Peter was much more sort of, in those days, computer savvy. And he said, oh, it would be nice to have to put some things on. Basically, I suppose it was to begin with, we thought it might publicise the roadshow, the Panto Roadshow. But bit by bit, it got beyond us technically. So we got the lovely Simon Curtis, who took over running it technically for us. And that left me free to do the bit I love, which is historical research. I love knowing who came before me and what they did. Yes, and that's how it sort of began. It started off really with me wanting to tell people, as I think all drama colleges should do, they should employ someone who says, look, this is who came before you. So you can't do what you do in pantomime if you don't nod to the past and acknowledge why we do this. Why do you come on from stage left? Why do you come on from stage right? Why? All these things. So that's what I wanted to do with the website. But nowadays it's become it is quite enormous. I suppose it's the Encyclopedia Britannica of panto. It's acknowledging the past
and the present.
Oh, we do our yes, our diary is the present. That's Simon's baby. People send us all the information, and I don't know how he does it because I'm not computer savvy, but he literally loads it all up. I think we do every single pantomime in the country, and then we get all the names from the managements, and I like to have everybody's name on it if possible. If they send it to us, we do it. It is fascinating to look back on.
I think it's really interesting as well, and we've tried to do this with the podcast really to give people an insight into the industry and how it works and so on. But your blogs, your own personal diaries of your shows are fascinating because they're a real insight into the industry. And it's interesting what you mentioned about drama schools and colleges. I don't think they cover panto enough, certainly in some cases at all.
No, you're absolutely true, because what happens is, as we know, it's going to be your first job when you come out of that drama school. Whilst you've been in there, you've probably already done 2 pantos before you actually hit the road, professionally. And this year we had the most amazing ensemble from Lanes. Just the standard and the quality, and you just think, yes, this is fabulous, and they're getting their experience doing the panto. But somebody needs to go to those colleges and say, and I'm not flogging myself because there's too many colleges and not enough time, to give a nod to, if this is going to be your first job, you're going to go in, you may just go in thinking you're going to be singing and dancing in an ensemble, but that you're also going to be understudying and covering, and you are going to go on. So you better know what you're doing. And I think there should be courses of panto. And of course, Dr. Robert Marsden has set up, is it an MA?
It is an MA, yes.
An MA, yes, in pantomime. If I could go back to that Swansea Grand Bar, where all those old gentlemen were wearing their coats and their hats, and said to them, excuse me, gentlemen, do you realise that in the future there's going to be an MA in what you're doing? They would probably just keel over. They would have no idea that thing that they're doing for a living could actually become an art form.
Especially when you consider it was far from academic. Most of it wasn't even written down.
Oh, absolutely. It just passed on in shorthand. The scripts from way back in those days, I can remember seeing them because I used to help people learn lines, would have TBA written on them, to be arranged. Enter Dame, own business.
Yes.
Enter comic, TBA. And those comics would get together and do what they do. We all have a little speciality. I have a strip that I always do wherever possible, which historically is a nod to Terry Scott. It's also a nod to John Inman. I'm carrying on what they did, but I've made it my own in special ways. And if anybody dares to try and copy it while I'm still breathing, they'll know about it. But you literally take from the past and you push it forward. Pantomime is always adapting. It is evolving. It's never stood still. It's always attracted the new, the novel, the unusual. We've had some very strange things. You've got Mr. Blobby running about the stage. I've tripped over Postman Pat many a time on that. You think, what am I doing? But they are there because there is a need for them.
I think you're absolutely right. Baby Shark, for instance, nothing more bizarre than that, and many, many others. It's really important, though, as you say, that Panto continues to evolve and adapt. At the moment, for a number of reasons, society is changing. Possibly, we're coming to a really challenging time for the future of the genre. So where do you see it going in the future?
Well, I've just written and costumed a very successful Aladdin, which I don't find anything unusual about that because, the pantomime is one of our oldest. It was very well received, but I noticed that some theatres are wary of doing it. Here at Ilford, that Aladdin we did was an amazing experience because Aladdin is the most glamorous of all the pantos. That's where you can really, and we did spend the money, you can have that. You've got your flying carpets, you've got your magic, you've got your cave that transforms, you've got your fabulous characters. We don't want to lose those for political reasons when the pantomime here completely multi-racially cast. It's got everything you could want. It's got all the songs, it's got all the glamour. I'd like it to be a spectacle because it's a child. Everybody does this one. They all say, it's a child's first experience of theatre. But it is actually true that if you make that so spectacular, you bring a fairy tale to life and you make the show magic, then those kids are going to go, wow, I want to see this again. And then they'll bring their kids in their time.
I think in terms of evolution, it has to change. Certain things have to change and already are. But I wonder whether you think there's room for new titles we've never looked at before.
When you say new titles, are you saying let's bring back Goody Two-Shoes? Because nobody knows the plot.
There are some good reasons why some have been left behind because the story is minimal, confusing, or just not there at all. But I have to disagree with you there because Bluebeard, the most popular Victorian pantomime. What's wrong with putting on a pantomime for kids in which he kills his wife every single night? It's I can't imagine. It's just like, some of those titles really did need to go because some of them were obscure. I've never really understood Humpty Dumpty, but when you look at it and you see how popular it was, it's a vehicle. You have to understand that Humpty Dumpty, the pantomime wasn't the important thing. It was the person. It was a vehicle for people like Norman Evans. Yes.
And it can be a vehicle today. You've got the fabulous talents that are around in the country. The evolution is that you mould the subject matter around your performers. And you wrap them in a lovely, warm, funny, comical, spectacular blanket.
So there are others that, again, haven't been performed for some time. Sinbad was around for quite some time. Robinson Crusoe. But I'm thinking of brand new titles, more contemporary perhaps. The problem is, of course, Nigel, as we all well know, that many theatres and producers survive on the box office at the Christmas time pantomime.
Yes.
And so taking a big leap of faith with something that's not been tried and tested is something that many producers can't afford to do.
And there, of course, is the Disney effect. If a subject matter has been handled by Disney and marketed by Disney and the kids all know it. So we all know that the theatre's popularities are the Snow Whites, the Sleeping Beauties, the Cinderellas, to some extent Aladdin's, which used to be very hugely popular. They've all been touched by the magic glow of Disney. In our Panto Roadshow, we spent the whole time saying, no, the villain in Aladdin is called Abanazar. He's been called Abanazar for 130 years, 150 years. He's not called Jafar. But every kid knows him as Jafar because Disney says it's Jafar.
Yeah.
In Robin Hood, it's it's Friar Tuck who gets kidnapped. In the Disney version, in our version, of course, it used to be Robin and Marion looked after the babes in the wood. So new subject matters. Michael Harrison's putting on Pinocchio at the Theatre Royal Newcastle as a massive, spectacular panto with Clive Danny up there and Chris Hayward. So that, to a certain extent, I mean, I know it's not a new story, but it is a new subject. You're talking about stepping away from fairy tale and going into another, maybe, I don't know, what's your thoughts?
I'm just thinking the fairy tales of today could be the pantomimes of tomorrow somehow. Some of the Grimm brothers fairy tales are particularly dark, and
yes,
they've not been touched for a while for good reason.
Snow Queen, for example. Yeah, Snow Queen was a tricky one because I can remember years ago being asked to do a panto version, write one, and I got about quarter way through and I thought, I can't turn this story into a pantomime because of its darkness. You just, it's a bit tricky. So yeah, I think if you look at the stuff that David Walliams is writing, that's catching the children's imagination, his books, maybe we're looking along those sort of lines for the future. I don't know.
I think you might be right, and there are panto elements in some of those stories.
Every dame would like to be a gangster granny.
I think the most important thing, I don't know if you agree with me finally, but the most important thing is whatever happens with the stories, with the casting, the characters or whatever, the elements of pantomime have to be there. That interaction with the audience, that
yes,
pulling down the fourth wall, that
yes,
slapstick, the funniest thing that ever happens still today that makes people laugh no matter what they're doing is somebody slipping over on a banana skin. You'll never take that away, so slapstick will always be incredibly funny. And I think as long as many of those elements are still in there, pantomime has a bright future, whichever way it goes with stories.
Yeah. I mean, I called my website itsbehindyou.com for a particular reason, because in all the years that I've done pantomime and in all the sophisticated things you can do and all the new and novel things that have happened since I've been doing panto, there is still nothing to beat the reaction of an auditorium screaming at somebody wearing a sheet, wandering behind you going woo woo woo. It's because, and I was analysing it, when you do the ghost gag you've got plenty of time to analyse it, because there's mostly it's 5 minutes of constant screaming and a little bit of you trying to say what, where, it's the frustration of us not A, believing there's a ghost, and B, seeing it. And that makes the children react. It's a response. It probably goes back to the caveman telling stories round the fire kind of thing. It's instinctive. Nothing will ever beat that effect. And to stand on stage in a ghost gag and see that reaction from such a simple thing, that is why pantomime will survive, because it's kind of instinctive and built into us. It's Behind You is what pantomime is, wrapped up in one single scene.
You're absolutely right. Check out the website, itsbehindyou.com. Simplicity itself. And I remember Bill Maynard saying to me a number of years ago, he wasn't a big fan of gorillas behind you or mummies or whatever. The simple ghost with a sheet is the way that it's always been, and it works, so why change it?
If it ain't breaking, don't fix it.
Listen, I could talk to you all day, Nigel. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the very best for the next pantomime season. It will be lovely to catch up with you again on the podcast in the future. But in the meantime, thank you so much for talking to us.
Well, thank you for having me on your fabulous podcast.
Well, I'm afraid that's about it for now. As I said at the very beginning of the episode, there are many more fabulous guests still to come. Please subscribe through your favourite podcast app and make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, for episode 47, when I'll be joined by Steve Bowden and Eric Potts for the first of an occasional series looking at the most popular pantomime titles. And what better way to start that than with Cinderella? Take care, and I'll see you next time on Just Imagine.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.